Welcome, everyone. This is Dave Thomas again, hosting the Belmont Plateau Hall of Fame show, where we invite guests onto at Belmont Plateau who gave outstanding contributions and are associated with the long, great history of distance running in the city of Philadelphia. So I'm excited today to have a couple of Villanova runners from the early 1970s on. Jerry Bouma and John Hartnett are going to join us in a few minutes here. And Jerry just most recently wrote a book on his experiences at Villanova, running for Villanova for the 4 years there. And the title of the book is "Touching Greatness Forever Together: The Villanova Track Story, 1966 to 1981." So guys out there who are fans of distance running, and you think of Villanova, you can always think of how well known they were, known not just in Philadelphia but nationally, internationally. I mean, who could forget the white singlets with the Villanova sprawled across, and the likes of Dave Patrick, Marty Liquori, Ron Delaney, Eamonn Coughlin, Maree, Marcus Sullivan. Without knowing how great those teams were, and obviously the great coaches that were there with Jumbo Elliot and Jack Pyrah. So today we're going to touch on some of those memories with Jerry and with John. So welcome aboard, guys.
Thanks for taking an interest in this, Dave.
Yeah, and before we get started, I just want to give the people out there a little background on Jerry. Jerry was the first Canadian that had an athletic scholarship to Villanova. Came from, I believe, like a farmland not too far outside Toronto, and was the top junior runner in the 1500 and 800 meters for Canada back in those days. And then you can introduce John and tell the people, John's story there.
Well, Dave, I was this, I could say in reflection, this precocious farm kid that wanted to be very involved in sports. And hockey was my first interest, no surprise as a Canadian, and baseball in the summer. But I grew up in a dairy farm, and there was always a lot of work to do, namely milking cows twice a day. And in the summer times, it was nonstop activity from seeding to haying to harvest. And my parents being immigrants from the Netherlands, the only thing they really knew was hard work. And so there was no sports culture per se. And so I didn't really have a chance to play any team sports. Didn't have the transportation, didn't have parents who would drive me anywhere. So when I was about 13, 14, I discovered running at high school. I ran a couple of cross-country races, didn't show any promise, to be quite frank. But the summer before I turned 15, I was introduced to interval training. I read Roger Bannister's book, and I thought, I can do this. So I started to take running quite seriously and develop my own training program. And went back to school that fall. Now I'm in the 11th grade, and I started winning races. And and now I was in Ontario, so we had a grade 13. So I had 2 more years, even though I was still only 16 at the beginning of my last year. By the time I was 17, I ended up breaking all the under 18 Canadian records for the 1500, both indoors and outdoors, as well as the mile. And I also won the Canadian Junior 800 meter championships. I ran 4:09 for a mile on a dirt track, and that's what brought attention to Villanova. And I was fortunate enough to be offered a scholarship. Interestingly, I think I was the only farm boy to arrive on campus till 2 days later, when another farm boy arrived, and that was John Hartnett from County Cork, and he's also from a dairy farm. And he has such an interesting story how he started running and what brought him to Villanova. So John and I met his second day there, and we became best of friends. And we would spend many of our runs talking about farming, the European Economic Community Ag Policy at the time, just the routine of the dairy farms, et cetera. And so, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Dave, for having me on here. Great introduction there by Jerry, for sure. Yeah, I started running when I was probably somewhere between 14 and 15. I messed around a little bit with the local sports. Likewise, I had no interest. So I discovered running. There was telling me for a long, long time. And a little bit unlike Jerry, fairly quickly, that I had some talent for particular. My early days in cross country, because again, very little opportunity to summertime for track seed, primarily on cross country, was as well as the track program was really system rather than a school system. I had some, great local club that come to meets, etc. And like I said, I kind of went on from there, and won provincial titles, won national titles, eventually a European cross country, and that's when I got over and arrived on campus. I guess late August, early September of '70. Kind of a very quick how I got to Villanova, but there's a lot more.
Now, John, reading Jerry's book, it was a kind of a funny story. I know you grew up in County Cork, and the closest phone was about 2 miles away. And tell us about your story, your whole journey, I guess, maybe quickly, about getting to Villanova from where you were. I heard it was kind of a funny story. Did we lose John?
I think.
The sound is not that good, Dave. I don't know what you're picking up.
Right now, I don't hear John.
Yeah, it's not. I have the same issue.
Well, maybe
I'm just,
Jerry, you can tell the story then, maybe.
well, I certainly can, because of course, John and I spent a lot of time together. We put lots of miles together. And one thing I will say, Dave, interesting enough, both of us were doing similar workouts. We didn't know each other, but that winter of 1970, when John was preparing for the European, first of all, the county championships and the Irish championships, and ultimately he went on to win the European Junior Cross Country Championships. He was coming off an injury, and his coach had learned, as I had, that the most efficient way to get in shape quick was to do repeat 200s. Mm-hmm. And so at nighttime, he was out on the field with a lantern at each end of the field doing repeat 200s in the pitch black. Meanwhile, I was doing repeat 200s on the snowy roads in Ontario, which proved very effectively for me. And we both had great success on that kind of a program. Now, when John, I know when he left in early September of 1970, of course, it was a huge event. And back in those days, in the early 70s, when you left, it was kind of like almost like the last goodbye, because you never knew if anybody was coming back. I know my parents immigrated in the early 50s, and when they left the Netherlands, they thought that was it. They'd never see their relatives again. And this wasn't all that much later, quite frankly. But John got on the plane from Shannon, and they hardly got off the ground, and the plane hit some birds, and bird got sucked into a jet engine, and they were back on the ground. Fortunately, his family didn't know this. They were already heading back to Cork. There was a tremendous delay, and I think it was 12 hours later, he finally got another flight to New York. By that time, Billy McLaughlin was supposed to pick him up. He had long disappeared. John ends up at JFK, have no clue what to do next, but fortunately he met a priest who gave him instructions to get to Penn Central station, which he found, and then he took a train to Philadelphia. And then, of course, once you get to Philly, then finding the right commuter train to get out on the main line, well, that's not so easy either. If you know the 30th Street station, it's a busy spot. Well, John did find the right train, but of course, when the conductor yelled out all the stops, you couldn't make head nor tails of what the conductor was saying with that thick South Philadelphia accent. And finally, he said, "Is Villanova on this line?" He said, "Yes." And he got off of Villanova, and didn't know anybody. No one knew him. And then he ended up meeting another priest to put him up in the monastery for the night. So it wasn't until the next day at the cafeteria he did finally find, I think, Jack Pyrah, and was introduced to the team. So
I want to get back to that title, Jerry.
The Duke?
Your title of the book, Touching Greatness Forever Together, 1966 to 1981. What was your, that's what I'm just saying. What was your motivation? Like, why those dates and why the name, the title, and it I think it all ties into the whole essence of the book when I read it.
Well, Dave, the time period 66 to 81 is significant because during that time period from 1966 to 1981, Villanova won every distance medley relay at the Penn Relays for 16 consecutive years. And that's the essence of the story, the streak. I don't think there's any streak like that in sports to win that type of a championship year in, year out for that period of time. And so it begs the question, how did this happen? Who made it happen? What were the conditions that led to this? And the title goes back to, and I really attribute the essence of the accomplishment and the culture that was built and imbued in the team back to Dave Patrick and Charlie Messenger. And in 2018 was the 50th anniversary of 5 championship wins when Villanova won 5 in 1968. And Dave actually addressed the breakfast at Villanova that's held before Penn Relays that Saturday morning. And he used that term, touching greatness forever together. And it really resonated with me because I think that really defines the team and also is emblematic of what was accomplished. And my motivation to write the book really was several fold. First and foremost, to draw attention to this incredible history of performance, because that was, while Villanova won 16 DMRs in succession, they won a total of 52 Championships of America races in that same time period. So if you add up all the 4-mile relays or the 4x15s, the 4x8s, the sprint medleys, the mile relays, distance medley, 52 races. So Villanova dominated the Penn Relays. In fact, so much so, a lot of schools started referring to Penn Relays as the Villanova Relays, and schools decided, in many respects, not even to come because they would know they would get their butts kicked by Villanova. They'd go to Texas or Drake or Kansas, and they say the heck with Penn, which was a problem for Tuppeny, who was trying to bring the best schools to Penn Relays year in, year out. So it was the inspiration, I think, and the foundation established by Dave Patrick and Charlie Messenger. And what was unique about that, well, everybody has teams and team spirit. Dave and Charlie came as a tandem. They went to the same high school. They came as really partners. And back in his day, in 1964, freshmen, of course, weren't allowed to compete in varsity events, including Penn Relays. And so the level of camaraderie that and depth of, let's say, team spirit that Charlie and Dave brought, which was very natural for them, in my view, really cemented the kind of bond and that forever together element that I speak about in the title, of course, but also I try to capture throughout how this legacy was passed from generation to generation for literally, 5 complete turnovers of athletes during that period.
Yeah, what would you attribute, the long-term excellence of Villanova, some people say, oh, it's the coach, it's training, it's this and this, but I guess it's a connection of everything you were talking about in the book. It's the characters involved, the times that you guys grew up in,
Yeah.
all those things.
Dave, it was a true convergence of several unique factors that just I don't think will ever come together the way it did for that period of time. There was no question Jumbo Elliott as a coach was the huge influencing and decisive factor in his approach to track. In a sense, the way he kept it simple, but also he kept his athletes. He knew what type of athletes to select. He selected slim, light-footed, if you will, middle distance runners, high school kids that could run the 800 or the 880 in the mile. He knew the body type he was after, but he also looked at the mentality. He wanted kids that were bright, who would do well in school, but he also looked for the quality of humility. And he didn't want to deal with arrogant, self-absorbed kids. And that became evident in terms of the characters that really emerged and the leadership that emerged. So, but Jumbo also had a very unique approach. In fact, coaching to him was a hobby. He had his own very successful heavy equipment business, dealership. He did very well, and he would literally drop in to the school at the very most 3 times a week during the indoor season and outdoor season. And cross country, we'd see him once a week. In September, we might not see him at all, except once. He would welcome us and say, well, welcome to Villanova. Just put in the miles, nice and easy, money in the bank. And be very clear, there are 3 things in life, and you can only do 2 well. Number 1, your studies. Number 2, your sports. And number 3, your social life. You got 3 things that you can do, but you can only do 2 well. So you better pick the 2 that are important. And those words really resonated across the board. He didn't say a lot, but what he said was listened to very carefully. So obviously the coach set the stage. I also believe that just the ambience of Villanova as a place was a factor. It was a beautiful, beautiful location. The running loops we had were outstanding, but the facilities we had were extremely modest, to say the least. We had a locker room that was basically a hallway with lockers. We didn't even have a place to proper sit. We sat in these trunks that I think housed football equipment. Our cinder track wouldn't rival most high schools, and we trained on the boards. And the boards were really, I think, an important part of the resilience and the toughness that really defined Villanova track. Training in those windy, cold conditions on the boards, where at times we'd have to sweep the snow off the boards before we could do our workouts. It really made us tough. And also you kind of knew that once you stepped onto an all-weather tartan track, hey, you're ready to run, because now you're on a proper track. So there was that extra incentive. But then the characters, starting with Dave and Charlie, and then of course Liquori and Chris Mason, passing to John Hartnett and Ken Shappert, and Eamonn Coughlin was very much influenced by that dynamic, and he took the lead in the mid-70s. Outstanding runner. And of course, then you had the Don Paige and Mark Belger era, which was just unbelievable. And in fact, when we thought Villanova had peaked, they kept coming along and getting better. And then Sidney Maree was the best of them all. And then Marcus Sullivan. So there's the kind of the succession, like a relay race, if you will, and the performances and how they in turn influenced the team and built teams around them. And how teams supported them were really part of the mix of why Villanova was so successful for so long.
Yeah, and I think we lost John there. So, sorry, we'll bring John in another time. But I had this one question. I heard this. I thought it was pretty funny because I became an ultra runner after running 100-mile race stuff. But I saw one weekend John ran the Iffy course, which was a tough 10-mile course 5 times over the weekend. And I wanted to ask John what his motivation was, like why, what motivated him to do that. I don't know if you had any insight on if he told you that.
Oh, absolutely. But John, are you back on?
No.
I think we've lost John.
Yeah, we lost John.
Yeah, and what I might suggest, Dave, is maybe you can loop back to John and do an interview with him one-on-one, because he's got such an interesting story. This is when John started to realize that he was more than a cross-country runner. And he was already approaching at the end of his sophomore year. I think he ran a 403 mile his sophomore year. That winter of 72, 73, he started putting in the miles. And that's when I dubbed what you referred to, Dave, as the famous 5 frolic weekend. he would go out on Friday night and run the frolic. And often I'd run it with him. Although I did go through a period of injury where I wasn't able to do much training for quite a period of time, but he would then do it twice on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and then again twice on Sunday. So he was just running so smoothly, and just, it seemed like the more miles he put in, the stronger he got. And he had this incredible relaxed running style. As he approached the spring of 73, he went to, of course, he'd anchored the distance medley and it was on the 4-mile relay. And I think Villanova won 3 Penn Relays races that spring. Shortly thereafter, he went to Duke University and then officially broke the 4-minute mile. And then about 3 weeks later, Steve Prefontaine and Dave Waddle were collaborating. I guess they had run into a dispute with the AAU about going to Europe. So they said, what the heck, let's run one hell of a fast time at Eugene. So they organized the race, and John heard about it and was able to participate in it. And meanwhile, I was there, John was putting in, I know one week, and John will dig out his diaries because sometimes he doesn't believe what I recall, but he ran close to 140 miles like 2 weeks prior to this great mile that he ran in 73. And our exams were done. So we were just there training, and we were now running 3 times a day, especially John. We'd run, say, 5 to 7 in the morning, then do the track workout around 3:30 in the afternoon. So would it be 10, 15 times 400s, or repeat halves, or 8 400s and 6 200s. And then that night after we ate, he'd go out for another 3-mile run. So there we were, it had nothing to do but run, and John was just piling the miles. So he goes to Eugene, and that's when Waddle ran 3:53, and both John and Prefontaine ran 3:54. Prefontaine was just 1/10 of a second ahead of John, and of course that capitulated John to the top of the world rankings. I mean, that year he was ranked number 5 in the mile, and here he was, a friggin' cross-country runner. I always sort of laugh because John will say it himself, and unfortunately he can't comment, but he'd be hard pressed to break 55 or 54 for a 400. Yet he could hold a 58-second pace or a 59-second pace to still kick. He was remarkable in terms of his efficiency and his ability to run so smooth without tying up.
Well, before I lose you, I think we only have 3 minutes to go, but I just want to let everyone know, Jerry's book, once again, there it is.
Yes, yes.
Touching Greatness, Forever Together, the Villanova track story, 1966 and 81. They can get this on Amazon. Is that correct, Jerry?
That's correct. And I do plan to come to Penn Relays this year. We're going to hold a book launch on the 28th of April at Garrett Hill Ale House, one of Jumbo's former haunts. And we'll gather there the evening of the 28th. So I'll have books there. But just Dave, just briefly, I do describe each era in detail. That Patrick era, the Liquori era, and Liquori, of course, is such a special story too in terms of his ability to race and his ability to outrace Ryan, even though Ryan on paper was 3 or 4, at least 3 seconds faster in the mile. Liquori got to him and knew how to beat him, as did Patrick in running the indoor 880 a couple years earlier. And that's part of Jumbo's insight. He knew what Ryan's weaknesses were, and he really was able to direct both Dave and Marty to attack exactly at that point of weakness. Then we move into the Hartnett era, and John is such a great story. And Shappert was most, as John would describe Ken, as the ultimate teammate. There was nobody with more enthusiasm and vigor than Ken Shappert. And then we move into Eamonn Coughlin, and that is an incredible story. There's no, I think, athlete that has been so heralded and such a performer for such a long period of time as Eamonn Coughlin. And we, I do talk about his beginnings, and he had a rough start at Villanova. Took him a while to get going, but we could see that he had the talent. And then it started coming out. Then, of course, the New York's finest, Belger and Paige, two boys from New York, two fastest runners ever. And then we move into the Sidney Maree era, and I talk a little bit about his background and what had to be an incredible shock for him to come to upper middle class white school. And he comes from apartheid Africa. And that was a huge, huge adjustment, which most people had no idea what he was really up against. And yet he ran a 3:48 mile when he was at Villanova. Incredible. And then of course Marcus O'Sullivan, and I think it's a beautiful irony at the end. He's now been the Villanova track coach, and now he's actually produced more sub 4-minute milers than Jumbo.
Okay. Well, before we get cuts, anybody out there, you don't really have to be a track fan to read his book, or a Philly fan or a Villanova fan. It's a good lesson if you read it for a long-term friendship. Building character, things that will make it successful, not just in running, but in business and life in general. It's a great book to read that way too. So thanks a lot, Jerry. I will have to have you guys back on since we lost John and tell some more stories. But just welcome everybody next show. Again, this is the Belmont Plateau Hall of Fame show. So we're welcome you back next time. We'll have another great guest talking about Philadelphia distance running history. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.